You're walking through your neighborhood on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when you witness something that makes your blood boil. A frail, elderly man with a walking cane struggles to cross the street while a group of teenagers mock him, pushing him around like he's nothing more than an obstacle in their path. Your first instinct might be to intervene, to shout, or to call for help. But what if I told you that this single moment of cruelty would spark a chain reaction so powerful that it would restore your faith in humanity? What happens next isn't just a story about bullying or disrespect. It's about honor, brotherhood, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of service. It's about how one act of cowardice can awaken a sleeping giant, and how the echoes of military training never truly fade, even decades after the last salute. This isn't just another feel-good story you'll forget by tomorrow. This is about Harold Morrison, a 90-year-old World War II veteran who thought his fighting days were over, and the Marines who proved that Semper Fi isn't just a motto, it's a promise that transcends time, age, and circumstance. Get ready to witness what happens when disrespect meets honor, when weakness encounters strength, and when a community discovers that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear dress blues and carry memories of battles fought on foreign shores. The story you're about to read will make you angry, proud, emotional, and ultimately remind you why respect for our elders isn't just a nice gesture. It's a cornerstone of a civilized society. And sometimes it takes a few good Marines to remind everyone what that really means. Harold Morrison had seen enough violence in his 90 years to last several lifetimes. The weathered hands that now gripped his aluminum walking cane had once held an M1 Garand rifle on the beaches of Normandy. The same eyes that now struggled to read the morning newspaper had witnessed the liberation of a concentration camp in 1945. But nothing in his extensive experience had prepared him for the casual cruelty he would encounter on Maple Street that Tuesday afternoon in October. The morning had started like any other for Harold. He woke at precisely 6:30, a habit ingrained by decades of military discipline that even arthritis and age couldn't break. His small apartment in the Sunrise-assisted living community was spartanly furnished but meticulously organized. A folded American flag sat in a place of honor on his dresser, next to a black and white photograph of 20 young men in military uniforms, most of whom would never see their 21st birthdays. Harold's daily routine was sacred to him. After his morning coffee and toast, he would walk the 6 blocks to the community center where he volunteered 3 days a week, helping other veterans navigate the labyrinthine bureaucracy of disability claims and benefits. The walk took him longer now than it had even a year ago, but he refused to let his daughter drive him. Independence was all he had left, and he guarded it fiercely. The October air was crisp, with the kind of clarity that made the autumn leaves seem to glow from within. Harold moved slowly but steadily down the sidewalk, his cane tapping a rhythmic pattern against the concrete. He nodded politely to Mrs. Chun, who was tending her garden, and waved to the mailman who had been delivering to this neighborhood for 15 years. These small interactions were the highlights of his day, brief moments of human connection that reminded him he was still part of the world. He was halfway to his destination when he heard them before he saw them. Loud voices, aggressive laughter, and the distinctive sound of skateboards rolling across pavement. Harold's military training kicked in automatically, and he assessed the situation with the same careful attention he had once used to scan tree lanes for enemy snipers. For teenagers, probably 16 or 17 years old, were approaching from behind. They were dressed in the uniform of suburban rebellion, oversized hoodies, sagging pants, and faces that wore hostility like makeup. The leader of the group was a tall, lanky boy with bleached hair and multiple piercings. His name was Tyler, though Harold didn't know that. Tyler had been in trouble with local police 3 times in the past year for vandalism and petty theft, but his family's money had kept him out of serious consequences. Behind him were his followers, Marcus, whose angry scowl masked deep insecurities about his home life. Jamie, who went along with whatever the group did because he was terrified of being alone. And Connor, who recorded everything on his phone because he believed infamy was the same thing as fame. Harold heard Tyler's voice rise above the others. "Look at this old fossil blocking the sidewalk. Probably fought in the Civil War." The comment was followed by cruel laughter that made Harold's jaw tighten. He had endured taunts about his age before, usually from people who had no understanding of what his generation had sacrificed for their freedom to be disrespectful. Harold continued walking, hoping the boys would simply pass him by. He had no interest in confrontation, especially not with children who clearly lacked proper guidance. But Tyler had other plans. The teenager picked up his pace and deliberately bumped into Harold's shoulder as he passed, causing the elderly man to stumble slightly. "Hey, watch where you're going, old man," Tyler said loudly, as if Harold had been the one to initiate contact. His friends laughed and closed ranks around Harold, forming a loose circle that prevented him from continuing his walk. Harold straightened his shoulders, a motion that was purely instinctive after 7 decades. In that moment, he wasn't a 90-year-old retiree struggling with arthritis and failing eyesight. He was Sergeant Harold Morrison, United States Army 101st Airborne Division, and he had faced down Nazi machine gun nests with less trepidation than he felt facing these misguided children. "Excuse me, son," Harold said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from commanding respect on battlefields. "I'm just trying to get to the community center. I don't want any trouble." Tyler stepped closer, emboldened by his friend's presence and Harold's apparent frailty. "What if I don't want to excuse you? What if I think you should find another way to walk, Gramps?" The other boys laughed nervously. What had started as casual harassment was escalating into something more serious, and even Marcus was beginning to feel uncomfortable. But Tyler was on a roll now, feeding off their attention and his perception of power over someone who couldn't fight back. "Maybe we should teach you some manners," Tyler continued, reaching out to grab Harold's cane. "Old people need to learn respect for their betters." This was the moment that everything changed. As Tyler's hand closed around the cane, Harold felt something snap inside him. Not his patience, not his self-control, but rather his willingness to be a victim. This cane wasn't just a mobility aid. It was a gift from his late wife, Margaret, purchased with money she had saved from her part-time job at the library. The brass handle was engraved with his military unit designation and the dates of his service. It was one of the last physical connections he had to the woman who had waited for him through 3 years of war and loved him through 57 years of marriage. "Take your hands off my cane, son," Harold said, his voice dropping to the kind of low, dangerous tone that had once made enemy prisoners tell him everything they knew. Right now, Tyler laughed and yanked the cane away, causing Harold to stumble and nearly fall. The elderly man caught himself against a nearby fence post, his dignity bruised more than his body. "What are you going to do about it, fossil? Call the cops? Tell your mommy?" What happened next would be recorded on Connor's phone and uploaded to social media within minutes. Tyler raised the cane above his head and brought it down hard against the concrete sidewalk, snapping the shaft in 2 pieces. The brass handle, with its careful engraving, clattered across the pavement and rolled into the gutter. Harold stared at the broken pieces of his cane, and for a moment, he was no longer standing on Maple Street in suburban Connecticut. He was back in a bombed-out church in France, holding Margaret's last letter and wondering if he would live long enough to marry her. He was in a foxhole in Belgium, sharing his last piece of chocolate with a kid from Iowa who would be dead before morning. He was at Arlington Cemetery, watching as they folded the flag over his best friend's coffin. The teenagers saw an old man's tears and mistook them for weakness. They didn't understand that these weren't tears of fear or sadness, but of rage so pure and focused that it transcended physical limitations. Harold Morrison had stormed beaches under machine gun fire, had parachuted behind enemy lines in the dead of night, had held dying friends in his arms while enemy artillery fell around them like deadly rain. And now, 7 decades later, he was being humiliated by children who had never known hardship, never faced real danger, never learned that freedom isn't free. Tyler pushed Harold again, this time hard enough to send the elderly man sprawling onto the sidewalk. Harold's knee scraped against the concrete, tearing his carefully pressed slacks and drawing blood. His glasses flew off his face and skittered across the pavement, one lens cracking against the curb. "Stay down, old man," Tyler said, standing over Harold with a satisfaction that was ugly to witness. "Maybe next time you'll remember to stay out of our way." Harold struggled to his knees, then slowly, painfully, to his feet. Without his glasses, the world was a blur of shapes and colors, but he could still make out the figures of the four teenagers. He could hear their laughter, could sense their cruel satisfaction at his helplessness. But Harold Morrison hadn't survived the bloodiest war in human history by giving up when things looked impossible. He had learned long ago that sometimes the best thing you can do is simply endure, to refuse to break no matter what force is applied against you. So he stood there, bleeding and half-blind, and did something that surprised the teenagers. He smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that predators recognize in each other, the smile of someone who has seen genuine monsters and knows the difference between real danger and playground bullying. It was the smile of a man who had nothing left to lose and was beginning to remember what he was capable of when properly motivated. "Is that the best you can do, son?" Harold asked quietly, his voice steady despite the blood trickling down his leg. "Because if it is, you might want to reconsider your approach to life." Tyler's confident expression faltered slightly. There was something in the old man's tone, something in his posture despite his injuries, that suggested Harold Morrison might be more dangerous than he appeared. For the first time since the confrontation began, Tyler felt a flicker of uncertainty. But it was too late to back down now, especially with his friends recording everything. Tyler had built his reputation on being fearless, on never backing down from anyone. He couldn't let an old man make him look weak, even an old man who was clearly tougher than he appeared. "You want more, Gramps?" Tyler asked, his voice rising with false bravado. "Because I've got plenty more where that came from." Harold didn't answer. He was scanning the street, noting potential witnesses, possible escape routes, and the location of his broken cane. But more importantly, he was doing something that the teenagers couldn't see. He was remembering his training, remembering his oath, remembering the words that had been drilled into him so many years ago. "I will never abandon a fellow service member." What the boys didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Harold Morrison wasn't alone on that street. 3 blocks away, at the American Legion Hall, a monthly meeting was just ending. 27 veterans, ranging in age from 32 to 86, were filing out of the building and heading to their cars. Among them were 6 Marines, and Marines never forget one of their own. The first to see the video was Gunnery Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, who was scrolling through social media on his phone while waiting for his wife to finish her shopping. The video had been uploaded just minutes before with the caption, "Watch us destroy this pathetic old loser. Hashtag no respect, hashtag get wrecked." Mike watched the 30-second clip once, then twice, then a third time. By the 4th viewing, his hands were shaking with rage. He recognized the uniform in Harold's bearing, the way he held himself even while under attack. This wasn't just some random old man being bullied. This was a brother, a fellow warrior, and he was under assault by enemies who didn't deserve to share the same air. Mike immediately forwarded the video to every Marine he knew in the area. Within minutes, it had been shared dozens of times. Within an hour, it had reached Marines across 3 states. By evening, it had been seen by active duty personnel stationed in 12 different countries. But the first response came from much closer to home. Staff Sergeant Tony Chun, recently returned from his 3rd deployment in Afghanistan, lived just 4 blocks from where Harold had been attacked. He had seen Mike's message while he was having coffee with 2 other Marines, Corporal Lisa Washington, who was home on leave, and Lance Corporal David Kim, who was recovering from wounds received in combat 6 months earlier. Tony's face went white as he watched the video. "This happened 20 minutes ago," he said, showing the timestamp. 4 blocks from here. Lisa leaned over to watch, and David could see her jaw muscles working as she fought to control her anger. "That's assault on an elderly person," she said quietly. And look at the way he holds himself. That man served. David didn't say anything for a long moment. He was thinking about his grandfather, who had fought in Korea and had never talked about what he had experienced there until the day he died. He was thinking about respect and honor and the oath he had taken to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. "We need to find this man," David said finally. "We need to find him right now." Tony was already standing up, pulling his jacket on. "Let's go." As the three Marines left the coffee shop, none of them spoke about what they planned to do when they found Harold Morrison. They didn't need to discuss it. They all understood that some things were more important than regulations, more important than potential consequences, more important than staying out of trouble. A fellow warrior had been attacked. A brother had been humiliated. An elder who had earned respect through service and sacrifice had been denied the basic dignity that should be accorded to any human being. The teenagers had made a serious mistake. They had attacked someone under the protection of the United States Marine Corps, and Marines never forget. More importantly, they never forgive attacks on their own. The hunt was about to begin, and Harold Morrison was about to learn that he wasn't as alone in the world as he thought. The brotherhood he had forged in war was still strong, still loyal, and still ready to answer the call when one of their own needed help. The war that Tyler and his friends thought they had won was actually just beginning, and they had no idea what they had unleashed. They were about to discover that some people don't stay victims for long, especially when they have the full weight of the United States Marine Corps backing them up. The next phase of this story would begin in exactly 47 minutes, when three active duty Marines would knock on Harold Morrison's door and ask a simple question that would change everything. "Sir, we understand you might need some assistance with a problem. We're here to help." Harold Morrison sat in his small apartment, holding the broken pieces of his cane like a soldier might hold the fragments of a fallen comrade's dog tags. His knee had been cleaned and bandaged by Mrs. Patterson, the building's nurse, but the deeper wounds, the ones to his dignity and spirit, were harder to address. He had managed to retrieve his glasses from the sidewalk, though one lens remained cracked, splitting his view of the world into fragmented pieces that seemed somehow appropriate. The apartment was quiet except for the steady tick of the mantel clock that Margaret had bought at an estate sale 30 years ago. Harold stared at the broken cane's brass handle, running his thumb over the engraved words that had once filled him with such pride. 101st Airborne Division, 1943 to 1946, Sergeant H. Morrison. The metal was scuffed now, scratched by its violent contact with the concrete, but the words were still legible. He had called the police, as Mrs. Patterson had insisted, but the conversation had been brief and unsatisfying. The officer who took his statement was polite, but clearly overwhelmed by more serious crimes. Assault by juveniles, especially when a victim wasn't seriously injured, was low priority. The teenagers would probably receive a warning, maybe community service if Harold was lucky. Justice, real justice, seemed as broken as his cane. Harold was contemplating whether he should call his daughter Linda when he heard the knock at his door. It wasn't the tentative rap of a neighbor or the official pounding of law enforcement. This was something different, firm, respectful, but carrying an unmistakable authority that made Harold straighten his shoulders automatically. He made his way to the door slowly, leaning heavily on the wall for support. Through the peephole, he could see three young people in civilian clothes, but something about their bearing made him pause. The way they stood, the way they held themselves, the respectful distance they maintained from his door, it all screamed military training. Harold opened the door and found himself face to face with Staff Sergeant Tony Chun, though he didn't know the rank or name yet. Tony was a compact man with intelligent eyes and the kind of quiet confidence that came from proven competence under fire. Behind him stood Corporal Lisa Washington, whose dignified bearing couldn't quite hide the steel beneath her polite exterior, and Lance Corporal David Kim, who despite his youth carried himself with the poise of someone who had seen too much too young. "Sir," Tony said, his voice carrying the respect that one warrior automatically accorded another. "Are you Harold Morrison?" "I am," Harold replied, something in his chest loosening at the formal address. It had been months since anyone had called him sir with that particular tone of respect. Sir, we're United States Marines. We saw the video of what happened to you today, and we wanted to check on your welfare. Tony's voice was carefully controlled, but Harold could hear the anger simmering beneath the surface. May we come in? Harold stepped aside without hesitation. Something about these three young people reminded him powerfully of his own squad from decades past. That mix of competence, loyalty, and barely restrained aggression that marked professional warriors. As they entered his apartment, he noticed how their eyes automatically swept the room, cataloging exits, potential threats, and defensive positions. Old habits died hard, especially the ones that kept you alive. Please, sit down, Harold offered, gesturing to his modest furniture. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? Lisa smiled, the first genuine warmth Harold had seen from another human being all day. Thank you, sir, but we're fine. We wanted to make sure you were okay and to let you know that you're not alone in this. David stepped forward, and Harold noticed the young man walked with a slight limp, a recent injury, judging by the way he favored his left leg. Sir, I'm Lance Corporal Kim, and I want you to know that what happened to you today was unacceptable. Those kids attacked a veteran, and that's something we take very seriously. Harold felt his throat tighten with emotion. How did you know I served? Tony smiled grimly. Sir, you could take the Marine out of the Corps, but you can't take the Corps out of the Marine. Army, judging by your bearing. Infantry, probably airborne division, based on how you carry yourself. World War II era, given your age. I'm guessing you saw some serious action. Normandy, Market Garden, Battle of the Bulge, Harold confirmed, amazed at how accurately they had read him. 101st Airborne. The three Marines exchanged glances, and Harold saw something pass between them, a kind of silent communication that he remembered from his own military days. It was the look that said plans were being made, decisions were being reached, and actions would be taken. Sir, Lisa said carefully, we've identified the individuals who assaulted you. Their names are Tyler Morrison, no relation to you, Marcus Johnson, Jamie Ortega, and Connor Walsh. They're all 16 and 17 years old, and they have a history of this kind of behavior. Harold blinked in surprise. How did you find that out so quickly? David grinned, and for a moment he looked like the teenager he had been just a few years earlier. Sir, never underestimate the intelligence-gathering capabilities of motivated Marines with internet access and too much time on their hands. We got their addresses, their school records, their social media profiles, and a complete breakdown of their family situations. The video they posted has been shared over 3,000 times, Tony added. Most of the comments are expressing outrage at their behavior and sympathy for you. But what's more important is that it's reached the right people. Marines from here to Camp Pendleton are aware of what happened to you today. Harold felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of him was deeply moved by these young people's concern for his welfare. Another part of him was slightly intimidated by their efficiency and obvious capability for action. And a small, dark part of him that he usually tried to suppress was pleased at the thought that Tyler and his friends might be about to face consequences they hadn't anticipated. What exactly are you planning to do? Harold asked, though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to know the answer. Lisa leaned forward, her expression serious. Sir, we want to make this right. Those kids assaulted you, destroyed your property, and humiliated you in public. The legal system might give them a slap on the wrist, but that's not justice. That's not accountability. We're not talking about anything illegal, Tony added quickly, reading the concern in Harold's expression. We're talking about education. Those kids need to learn what respect means, and they need to understand the consequences of their actions. Harold studied their faces, seeing the determination there, but also the discipline. These weren't vigilantes looking for an excuse to use violence. These were professional warriors who understood the difference between justice and revenge, between necessary action and mere brutality. I appreciate your concern, Harold said slowly, but I don't want anyone getting into trouble because of what happened to me. Those boys are young. They don't understand what they did. David's expression hardened slightly. Sir, With respect, they're old enough to know right from wrong. They're old enough to understand that attacking an elderly person is cowardly and despicable, and they're certainly old enough to face the consequences of their choices. The problem, Lisa added, is that kids like this have never faced real consequences. They've been enabled their whole lives, told they're special, given participation trophies for showing up. They have no concept of honor, duty, or respect because nobody has ever demanded those things from them. Tony nodded agreement. Sir, we've been doing some research on these kids. Tyler Morrison comes from money. His father's a lawyer who's gotten him out of trouble before. Marcus Johnson has been in and out of juvenile programs since he was 12. Jamie Ortega follows along because he's afraid to stand up for himself. And Connor Walsh thinks recording violence and posting it online makes him some kind of celebrity. Harold absorbed this information, feeling a familiar weight in his chest. These weren't evil children, necessarily, but they were lost ones, kids who had never learned the values that Harold's generation had taken for granted. In his day, you respected your elders not because they were perfect, but because they had earned that respect through experience and sacrifice. You didn't mock the weak or defenseless because that was the behavior of cowards and bullies. What kind of education did you have in mind? Harold asked finally. The three Marines exchanged another look, and Harold could see they had already discussed this extensively. Tony cleared his throat and spoke carefully. Sir, we believe that respect is best learned through experience. These kids have never met anyone they couldn't intimidate, never faced anyone who wouldn't back down from their threats. They need to understand that the world contains people who are stronger than they are, more determined than they are, and not nearly as forgiving as you've been. Lisa picked up the thread. We're not talking about hurting them, sir. We're talking about scaring them, showing them what real strength looks like, what real discipline means, making them understand that their actions have consequences beyond whatever slap on the wrist they might get from the juvenile justice system. David leaned forward, his young face serious. Sir, I've seen what happens when people like this go unchecked. They escalate. Today it was shoving an elderly veteran and breaking his cane. Next month it might be attacking a woman walking alone at night, or picking on a disabled person, or targeting someone's child. Someone needs to show them that there are lines you don't cross and people you don't mess with. Harold picked up the broken pieces of his cane again, feeling the weight of them in his hands. He thought about Margaret, who had saved for months to buy this cane for his 90th birthday. He thought about the other residents of his building, many of whom were now afraid to walk alone after hearing about his attack. He thought about the casual cruelty in Tyler's voice, the pleasure the boy had taken in humiliating someone who couldn't fight back. I don't want anyone to get hurt, Harold said finally. Nobody's going to get hurt, sir, Tony assured him. We're professionals. We know how to apply exactly the right amount of pressure to achieve the desired result. These kids are going to learn respect, accountability, and humility. They're going to apologize to you, sincerely, and they're going to make restitution for the damage they caused. Ow! Harold asked. Lisa smiled, and there was something predatory in her expression that reminded Harold of the look his squad leader used to get when planning a night raid. We're going to pay them each a personal visit, sir. We're going to have a conversation about respect and consequences, and we're going to make sure they understand exactly who they attacked today and why that was a mistake. Harold considered this. Part of him, the part that had been shaped by decades of civilian life, by marriage to a woman who believed in turning the other cheek, by years of teaching Sunday school at the local Methodist church, wanted to refuse their offer. Violence, even the threat of violence, wasn't the answer to society's problems. But another part of him, the part that remembered what it felt like to charge across a beach under machine gun fire, the part that had seen good men die because evil men were allowed to act without consequences, understood that sometimes peaceful solutions weren't enough. Sometimes bullies only understood force, and sometimes the threat of consequences was the only thing that prevented greater violence down the road. I need some time to think about this, Harold said finally. Tony stood up, the other Marines following his lead. Of course, sir. We understand this is a big decision, but we want you to know that the offer stands, and it's not just the three of us. Word has gotten out through the Marine Network, and there are a lot of people who want to see this made right. How many people? Harold asked, curious despite himself. David grinned. Sir, the video has reached Marines stationed all over the world. We've gotten messages from Okinawa, from Afghanistan, from guys on ships in the Mediterranean. Local veterans organizations are talking about it. The VFW post downtown has pledged their support. The American Legion is organizing a response. Harold felt overwhelmed. He had lived for so long with the feeling that he was forgotten, that his service and sacrifice meant nothing to the current generation. To learn that complete strangers cared about what had happened to him, that people he would never meet were willing to stand up for him, was almost too much to process. Why? He asked quietly. Why do you care what happens to one old man? Lisa's expression softened, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight of emotion that she usually kept carefully hidden. Sir, my grandfather served in Vietnam. He came home to people spitting on him, calling him a baby killer, treating him like he was some kind of monster. He never talked about his service, never wore his medals, never asked for anything from a country that treated him like garbage when he came home. She paused, gathering herself. He died 5 years ago, and it wasn't until we were going through his things that we learned he had been awarded the Silver Star for rescuing 3 wounded soldiers under fire. He saved lives, sir, and he never got the recognition he deserved. He never got the respect he earned. David nodded. Sir, we take care of our own. It doesn't matter if you're Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marines. It doesn't matter if you served yesterday or 70 years ago. You serve this country, you sacrifice for people who will never know your name, and you deserve better than what those kids gave you today. Tony stepped forward and extended his hand. Sir, we're going to leave our contact information with you. When you're ready to make a decision, call any one of us. But understand that this isn't just about you anymore. This is about sending a message that there are still people in this world who believe in honor, respect, and accountability. Harold shook each of their hands, feeling the strength and determination in their grips. As they prepared to leave, Lisa turned back to him. Sir, there's something else you should know. The video those kids posted, it's backfired on them spectacularly. The comments are brutal. Their school has been flooded with calls demanding their expulsion. Local news stations are picking up the story. They thought they were showing off their power, but all they've done is show the world what kind of people they really are. After the Marines left, Harold sat in his quiet apartment and thought about choices and consequences. He thought about the kind of world he had fought to create and the kind of world that Tyler and his friends seemed determined to build. He thought about respect and honor and what it meant to be a man in a society that seemed to have forgotten those concepts. Most of all, he thought about Margaret and what she would have wanted him to do. She had been a gentle soul, but she had also been married to a warrior, and she had understood that sometimes gentle souls needed hard people to protect them. By the time the sun set, Harold Morrison had made his decision. He picked up the phone and dialed the number Tony had written on a business card. Staff Sergeant Shun, came the crisp voice on the other end. Son, Harold said quietly, this is Harold Morrison. I made my decision. There was a pause, and then Tony's voice, carefully controlled. What would you like us to do, sir? Harold looked at the broken cane in his lap, at the photograph of his fallen comrades, at the folded flag that represented everything he had once fought for and everything he was still willing to defend. I want those boys to understand what they did, he said firmly. I want them to learn respect, and I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else. Understood, sir, Tony replied. Consider it done. The wheels of justice were about to turn, Marine style, and Tyler Morrison and his friends were about to receive an education they would never forget. Tyler Morrison sat in his bedroom that evening, scrolling through the comments on his viral video with growing unease. What had started as a few dozen views among his friends had exploded into something much larger and far more serious than he had anticipated. The video now had over 15,000 views, and the comment section was a digital war zone of outrage and condemnation. This is disgusting, read one comment with over 200 likes. These kids should be ashamed of themselves. Someone needs to teach these punks a lesson, said another. That poor man served our country, and this is how he gets treated? Absolutely disgusting. Tyler's initial reaction had been to dismiss the negative comments as the whining of oversensitive people who didn't understand his generation's sense of humor. But as the hours passed and the criticism intensified, he began to feel the first stirrings of genuine concern. Several people had somehow identified him by name, and a few had even posted his home address. His Instagram and TikTok accounts were being flooded with angry messages from strangers. His phone buzzed with a text from Connor. Dude, my parents saw the video. I'm grounded for a month, and they're making me delete all my social media. Another message came from Jamie. My mom is crying. She says I'm a disgrace to the family. WTF is happening. Tyler tried to call Marcus, but the call went straight to voicemail. He tried again an hour later with the same result. Something was happening, something bigger than he had expected, and for the first time since the incident, Tyler felt a cold knot of fear forming in his stomach. What Tyler didn't know was that Marcus Johnson was at that moment sitting in a police car outside his apartment complex, being questioned about an unrelated vandalism incident that had suddenly become a priority for local law enforcement. The police had been contacted by several military veterans who had seen the video and demanded action. Marcus's previous arrests for petty theft and destruction of property were being reviewed with new attention, and his probation officer was asking hard questions about his association with Tyler Morrison. Meanwhile, across town, Jamie Ortega was in his family's kitchen, facing the disappointment of parents who had immigrated to America with dreams of giving their children better opportunities than they had enjoyed. His father, a construction worker who had never missed a day of work in 20 years, couldn't understand how his son had become the kind of person who would attack an elderly veteran. We came to this country because we believed in the American dream, his mother said through tears. We believed in respect, in hard work, in treating others with dignity. How do we raise a child who would do such a thing? But the real education was about to begin for Tyler Morrison himself. At exactly 9:30 that evening, as Tyler was trying to decide whether to delete the video or ride out the controversy, he heard a knock at his front door. His parents were out for the evening, leaving him alone in the large house that his father's law practice had purchased in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. Tyler assumed it was probably one of his friends. Maybe Connor wanted to talk about damage control. He opened the door without checking the peephole, expecting to see a familiar face. Instead, he found himself looking up at Staff Sergeant Tony Chun, who was dressed in civilian clothes, but whose military bearing was unmistakable. Behind Tony stood two other men whom Tyler didn't recognize, but who radiated the same quiet authority. All three were larger than Tyler, older than Tyler, and carried themselves with the kind of confidence that came from proven competence in dangerous situations. Tyler Morrison? Tony asked, though his tone made it clear this wasn't really a question. Yeah, that's me, Tyler replied, trying to project the same cocky attitude he had shown that afternoon. Who's asking? We're here to discuss your encounter with Harold Morrison today, Tony said calmly. May we come in? Something in Tony's voice made Tyler's bravado falter slightly. These weren't angry parents or school administrators. These were men who looked like they had dealt with much more serious problems than teenage rebellion. And they were treating Tyler with the kind of polite formality that somehow felt more threatening than outright hostility. I don't have to talk to you, Tyler said, though his voice lacked conviction. I don't even know who you are. You're absolutely right, Lisa Washington said as she appeared from around the corner of the house, where she had positioned herself to prevent Tyler from running out the back door. You don't have to talk to us, but you're going to want to hear what we have to say. David Kim materialized from the other side of the house, completing what Tyler suddenly realized was a carefully coordinated maneuver. He was surrounded, cut off from any easy escape, and facing three people who had clearly planned this encounter with military precision. Who are you people? Tyler demanded, though his voice was higher than he intended. We're United States Marines, Tony replied simply. And we're here because you attacked one of our brothers today. Tyler's face paled as he realized the implications. Look, I don't know what you think happened, but that old man was fine. It was just a joke. He wasn't hurt or anything. Lisa stepped closer, and Tyler could see the controlled anger in her eyes. Harold Morrison is 90 years old. He's a World War II veteran who served his country with honor and distinction. He fought against fascism, helped liberate concentration camps, and risked his life so that people like you could live in freedom. And you attacked him for your own amusement. It wasn't an attack, Tyler protested, though he was backing away from the door. We were just messing around. David moved to block Tyler's retreat. You destroyed his property. You pushed him to the ground. You humiliated him in public and recorded it for the entertainment of your friends. That's not messing around. That's assault. Tyler looked around desperately, realizing that his options were limited. He could try to run, but these people had clearly anticipated that possibility. He could call the police, but what would he tell them? That 3 people had come to his door to talk to him about his own criminal behavior? What do you want? Tyler asked finally. We want you to understand what you did today, Tony said, his voice remaining calm and measured. We want you to comprehend the magnitude of your mistake, and we want you to take steps to correct it. I didn't make any mistake, Tyler said, though his protest sounded weak even to his own ears. That old man was walking too slow, blocking the sidewalk. We just told him to move. Lisa's expression hardened. Do you know what Harold Morrison did during the war, Tyler? He jumped out of airplanes behind enemy lines. He fought his way through France and Belgium against trained German soldiers who were trying to kill him. He watched his friends die in front of him, and he kept fighting because he believed in something bigger than himself. That's ancient history, Tyler muttered. That doesn't have anything to do with me. David stepped forward, and Tyler could see a scar running along the young man's jaw. Evidence of combat much more recent than World War II. Let me tell you about ancient history, Tyler. 6 months ago, I was in Afghanistan trying to protect a village from Taliban fighters who wanted to execute everyone who had cooperated with American forces. I got hit by an IED while escorting a convoy of medical supplies to a children's hospital. Tyler stared at the scar, suddenly, understanding that this wasn't ancient history at all. This was immediate, personal, and ongoing. The reason I was there, David continued, the reason any of us were there was because people like Harold Morrison established the principle that Americans don't let bullies run wild. They established the idea that the strong have an obligation to protect the weak, that freedom requires courage, and that some things are worth fighting for. Tony took over. But you don't understand any of that, do you, Tyler? You've never had to fight for anything. You've never had to sacrifice for anyone else. You've been handed everything you wanted by parents who were too busy or too guilty to teach you right from wrong. You don't know anything about my parents, Tyler said defensively. We know your father is a lawyer who specializes in getting wealthy kids out of trouble, Lisa replied. We know your mother sits on 3 charity boards, but has never done any actual volunteer work. We know you've been arrested twice and had the charges dropped because your father made donations to the right political campaigns. Tyler's mouth fell open. How do you know all that? Because we're professionals, Tony said simply. And because when you attack one of our own, we take the time to learn everything there is to know about you. The 3 Marines exchanged glances, and Tyler realized they were communicating through some system of signals that he couldn't understand. Whatever they had planned, they were moving to the next phase. Here's what's going to happen, Tyler, Tony said, his voice taking on a tone of absolute authority. You're going to learn what respect means. You're going to understand the consequences of your actions. And you're going to make things right with Harold Morrison. And if I don't, Tyler asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know the answer. David smiled, and there was something predatory in his expression that made Tyler take an involuntary step backward. Tyler, do you know what the unemployment rate is for veterans in this country? Do you know how many people who've served in combat are currently looking for ways to stay busy, to feel useful, to channel their training into something productive? Tyler shook his head, not understanding where this was going. There are over 2 million veterans in this state alone, Lisa continued. Active duty, reserves, retired, discharged. They're teachers and policemen and business owners and construction workers. They're everywhere, Tyler, and they all share certain values: honor, duty, loyalty to their brothers and sisters in arms. Tony pulled out his phone and showed Tyler a screenshot. This is a group message thread that now includes over 400 veterans who have seen your video. They know your name, Tyler. They know where you live, where you go to school, where you work. They know your parents' names and addresses. Tyler stared at the phone screen, seeing message after message of outrage and promises of action. His hands began to shake as he realized the scope of what he had inadvertently triggered. "We're not threatening you, Tyler," David said carefully. "We're educating you about the reality of your situation. You attacked someone who is under our protection, and that action has consequences that extend far beyond anything the juvenile justice system might impose. But here's the thing," Lisa added, "we're offering you a way out, a chance to make this right before it gets worse." Tyler looked between the three faces, seeing no mercy there, but also no sadistic pleasure in his fear. These weren't bullies enjoying his discomfort. They were professionals delivering information about a serious situation. "What do you want me to do?" Tyler asked quietly. Tony smiled for the first time since arriving at Tyler's door. "We want you to become the kind of person your grandfather would have been proud of. We want you to learn what it means to take responsibility for your actions. And we want you to understand that respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn." "Tomorrow morning," David said, "you're going to go to Harold Morrison's apartment. You're going to apologize for what you did sincerely and completely. You're going to offer to replace his cane and compensate him for his medical expenses. And you're going to ask him if there's anything else you can do to make amends. After that," Lisa continued, "you're going to spend the next 6 months volunteering at the VA hospital. You're going to read to patients who can't see, write letters for patients who can't write, and listen to stories from people who actually understand what service and sacrifice mean." Tyler felt a surge of his old rebelliousness. "You can't make me do any of that." "You're absolutely right," Tony agreed. "We can't make you do anything. But we can make sure that every veteran in this city knows exactly what kind of person you are. We can make sure that your video gets forwarded to the admissions committees of every college you've applied to. We can make sure that every potential employer who searches your name online finds out about the day you attacked a 90-year-old war hero." The threat was delivered in the same calm, professional tone that Tony might have used to discuss the weather, but Tyler felt the weight of it like a physical blow. These people weren't making empty threats. They were describing the natural consequences of living in a world where actions had lasting repercussions. "Or," David said, "you can choose to become the kind of person who deserves respect. You can learn from your mistake, make amends for what you did, and grow into someone your community can be proud of." Tyler looked at the three Marines, seeing in their faces a certainty and purpose that he had never experienced in his own life. They weren't asking him to become something they weren't. They were asking him to become something they had already proven themselves to be. "I'll do it," Tyler said finally. "I'll apologize. I'll volunteer at the VA. Just please don't ruin my life over one stupid mistake." Lisa's expression softened slightly. "Tyler, your life isn't ruined. Your life is just beginning. You have a chance to learn from this, to become better than you were yesterday. But understand that this is your one chance. If you make this choice and then go back to your old ways, if you think you can fake your way through an apology and then forget about it, you'll discover that Marines have very long memories." Tony handed Tyler a business card. "This has Harold Morrison's address and our contact information. You'll go to see him tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. You'll be respectful, sincere, and humble. And you'll remember that this conversation never happened. You're apologizing because it's the right thing to do, not because anyone forced you to." As the three Marines prepared to leave, David turned back to Tyler one last time. "Tyler, I want you to understand something. Every veteran who's seen your video isn't angry because you disrespected the military. They're angry because you forgot how to be human. Harold Morrison earned his respect, but even if he hadn't, he deserved basic human dignity because he's an elderly man who needed help, not harassment. When you go to see him tomorrow," Lisa added, "remember that you're not just apologizing to one old man. You're learning how to be the kind of person this country needs. Someone who protects the vulnerable instead of preying on them. After the Marines left, Tyler sat in his empty house and thought about choices and consequences. For the first time in his 17 years, he was beginning to understand that his actions affected people beyond himself, that the world contained individuals who were stronger, more determined, and far less forgiving than the adults who had shaped his life so far. He pulled up Harold Morrison's address on his phone and began planning what he would say the next morning. The old Tyler Morrison might have looked for ways to get out of this situation, to minimize his responsibility or shift the blame to someone else. But the new Tyler Morrison, the one who was just beginning to emerge from this encounter, understood that some mistakes could only be fixed by moving forward with honor and humility. Tomorrow would be the first day of the rest of his life, and for the first time ever, he was going to try to make sure it was a life worth living. Tyler Morrison stood outside the Sunrise Assisted Living community at 9:50 the next morning, clutching a replacement cane that had cost him $300 of his own money. Money he had earned working summers at his uncle's law firm, filing documents and answering phones. The cane was beautiful, made of polished cherry wood with a brass handle that bore an engraving he had specially commissioned. To Harold Morrison, with respect and gratitude for your service. He had barely slept the previous night, spending hours researching the 101st Airborne Division, the battles Harold had mentioned, and the broader context of World War II. For the first time in his life, Tyler had attempted to understand something from another person's perspective, to imagine what it might have been like to be a 19-year-old kid jumping out of an airplane into enemy territory, knowing that many of the men around you wouldn't live to see home again. The research had been overwhelming. Tyler read about the D-Day invasion, about young men his own age storming beaches under machine gun fire, about the liberation of concentration camps, and the horror that American soldiers had discovered there. He read first-hand accounts from veterans, stories of courage and sacrifice that made his own problems seem insignificant by comparison. Most importantly, he had read about the 101st Airborne Division, specifically the Screaming Eagles, who had parachuted behind enemy lines on D-Day, who had held the line at Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, who had earned a reputation for never retreating and never surrendering. Harold Morrison hadn't just been a soldier. He had been part of an elite unit that had changed the course of human history. Now Tyler stood outside Harold's building, feeling the weight of his actions in a way that was completely new to him. This wasn't the shallow remorse he had felt when caught shoplifting as a 12-year-old, or the tactical regret he had experienced when his vandalism had resulted in community service. This was something deeper, a genuine understanding that he had caused real harm to someone who deserved nothing but respect and gratitude. Tyler made his way to Harold's apartment, each step feeling heavier than the last. He knocked on the door with the same respectful approach the Marines had demonstrated the previous evening, and waited. Harold Morrison opened the door, and Tyler felt a shock of recognition that went beyond their previous encounter. Freed from the fear and adrenaline of the confrontation, Tyler could see Harold clearly for the first time. This wasn't the doddering old man that Tyler's prejudice had constructed. This was a person, a man who had once been Tyler's age, who had faced unimaginable challenges with courage and determination, who carried himself with a dignity that Tyler was only beginning to understand. "Mr. Morrison," Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Tyler Morrison, no relation. I'm the person who attacked you yesterday." Harold studied Tyler's face for a long moment, taking in the teenager's obvious nervousness, the careful way he held himself, the expensive cane in his hands. "I know who you are, son. The question is, why are you here?" Tyler had rehearsed this moment dozens of times during the sleepless night, but now all his prepared words seemed inadequate. "Sir, I came to apologize. What I did to you yesterday was wrong. Not just illegal, but morally wrong. I attacked someone who deserved my respect, and I did it for no reason other than my own ignorance and cruelty." Harold's expression didn't change, but he stepped aside to let Tyler enter the apartment. Tyler walked into the modest living space, immediately noticing the military memorabilia that he had missed during his research. The folded American flag, the black and white photographs of young soldiers, the citation frames hanging on the wall. This wasn't just a veteran's apartment. It was a shrine to service and sacrifice. "Sit down," Harold said, settling into his own chair with careful movements that reminded Tyler of the old man's age and frailty. Tyler remained standing, holding the replacement cane in both hands. "Sir, I know that nothing I say can undo what I did to you. I know that my apology can't take back the humiliation or the fear or the pain I caused. But I want you to know that I understand now who you are and what you represent." Harold raised an eyebrow. "And what do I represent, son?" "Everything I should aspire to be," Tyler replied, surprising himself with the honesty of the answer. "Last night I read about the 101st Airborne. I read about D-Day and Bastogne and Market Garden. I read about young men who left their families and their futures to fight against evil, who risked everything to protect people they would never meet." Tyler's voice began to shake slightly as the enormity of his ignorance hit him full force. "Sir, when I saw you on the street yesterday, I saw a weak old man who was in my way. I didn't see someone who had stormed the beaches of Normandy. I didn't see someone who had liberated concentration camps. I didn't see someone who had helped save the world from fascism." Harold watched Tyler carefully, evaluating the sincerity of his words. In his 90 years, he had become an expert at reading people, at distinguishing between genuine remorse and manipulative performance. What he saw in Tyler's face was raw, unfiltered shame, the kind of shame that came from truly understanding the magnitude of your mistakes. "What you saw," Harold said quietly, "was what I am now, an old man with arthritis and failing eyesight who moves slowly and needs help crossing the street. You weren't wrong about that, son. What you were wrong about was thinking that made me less worthy of basic human dignity." Tyler felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. "Sir, I don't understand how you can be so kind to me. If someone had done to my grandfather what I did to you, I would want to hurt them." Harold smiled slightly, and Tyler could see a hint of the young soldier he had once been. "Son, I've seen real evil in this world. I've faced people who committed atrocities that would make your worst behavior look like a child's tantrum. You're not evil, Tyler. You're ignorant, selfish, and poorly raised, but you're not evil." The words stung precisely because they were delivered with such matter-of-fact compassion. Tyler had expected anger, demands for punishment, threats of legal action. Instead, he was receiving the kind of honest assessment that no adult in his life had ever provided. "I brought you a replacement cane," Tyler said, extending the cherry-wood walking stick toward Harold. "I know it can't replace the one your wife gave you, but I wanted you to have something that reflected the respect you deserve." Harold took the cane and examined the engraving, running his finger over the carefully carved words. "This is beautiful, son." "Thank you." "Sir, there's more," Tyler continued. "I want to volunteer at the VA hospital. I want to learn about service and sacrifice from people who actually understand what those words mean. I want to become someone you might someday be proud to know." Harold set the cane aside and looked at Tyler with new interest. "That's a noble goal, son, but it's going to require more than just volunteer work. It's going to require you to change fundamental things about how you see the world and your place in it." "I want to change," Tyler said, and meant it. "Yesterday, I thought the world revolved around me, that other people existed for my entertainment or convenience. But those Marines who visited me last night, they helped me understand that there are people in this world who live for something bigger than themselves." Harold's eyebrows rose slightly. "Marines visited you?" Tyler nodded. 3 of them. "They didn't hurt me or threaten me. Not really. They just helped me understand the consequences of my actions and the choice I had to make about what kind of person I wanted to be." A smile played at the corners of Harold's mouth. "Did they now? And what kind of person do you want to be, Tyler?" "I want to be someone like you, sir," Tyler replied immediately. "Someone who serves something greater than himself. Someone who protects people instead of hurting them. Someone who earns respect through his actions instead of demanding it through intimidation." Harold studied Tyler for a long moment, seeing something in the teenager's face that reminded him of the young men he had served with so many decades ago. They had been Tyler's age when they volunteered to jump out of airplanes and charge machine gun nests, motivated not by anger or hatred, but by a simple understanding that some things were worth fighting for. "Tell me about your friends," Harold said. "The other boys who were with you yesterday." Tyler's expression darkened. "Marcus, Jamie, and Connor. They were my friends, I guess. But I'm not sure we were friends for the right reasons. We were just a group of people who enabled each other's worst impulses." "Have you spoken to them since yesterday?" "I tried calling, but nobody answered. I think they're in trouble with their families, maybe with the police too. The video Connor posted has been seen by thousands of people now, and most of them are pretty angry." Harold nodded thoughtfully. "And how do you feel about that?" Tyler considered the question carefully. "I feel bad for them, but I also understand that we all made choices yesterday. They chose to stand by and watch, and I chose to be the aggressor. We all have to live with the consequences of those choices." "What do you think their consequences should be?" This was a question Tyler hadn't expected, and he found himself thinking about it seriously. "I think they should have to face the same choice I'm facing, whether to learn from this and become better people, or to continue being the kind of people who let cruelty happen without intervening." Harold smiled, the first genuine smile Tyler had seen from him. "That's a wise answer, son. One of the hardest lessons I learned in the war was that good people sometimes make bad choices, and bad people sometimes make good choices. What matters isn't the mistake. It's what you do after you realize you've made one." Tyler felt something shifting inside him, a fundamental change in how he saw himself and his place in the world. "Sir, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How do you stop being selfish? How do you learn to care about other people more than you care about yourself?" Harold considered this question for a long moment. "It starts with understanding that your life is a gift, Tyler. Every day you wake up, every opportunity you have to help someone or make the world a little bit better. Those are gifts that came from the sacrifices of people you'll never meet." Harold gestured toward the photographs on his wall. "Those boys died so that you could have the freedom to choose what kind of person you want to be. The least you can do is choose to be someone worthy of their sacrifice." Tyler looked at the photographs, really seeing them for the first time. Young faces, many of them not much older than himself, frozen in black, and white moments before they went off to fight and die for principles they believed in. "I want to be worthy," Tyler said quietly. "I want to earn the right to live in the world they died to protect." Harold reached over and picked up his new cane, testing its weight and balance. "Then, let's start with something simple, son. Help an old man take a walk around the building. Show me that you understand what it means to care for someone who can't take care of himself." Tyler stood immediately, moving to Harold's side as the elderly man rose from his chair. As they made their way slowly toward the door, Tyler felt something he had never experienced before, the satisfaction that came from putting someone else's needs before his own. They walked together through the assisted living facility, Harold introducing Tyler to other residents, explaining the teenager's presence with simple dignity. "This is Tyler Morrison," he would say. "He's volunteering to help seniors with their daily activities." Tyler noticed how the other residents responded to Harold, with genuine affection and respect that had nothing to do with his military service and everything to do with the kindness and wisdom he showed in his daily interactions. This was what real respect looked like, Tyler realized. Not the fear-based deference he had demanded from weaker people, but the genuine admiration that came from consistent decency and grace. As they completed their circuit of the building and returned to Harold's apartment, Tyler felt as though he had just completed the most important journey of his life. Not the physical walk around the building, but the longer journey from ignorance to understanding, from selfishness to service. "Sir," Tyler said as they reached Harold's door, "would it be all right if I came back tomorrow? And the day after that? I know I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can learn to do better." Harold smiled and placed a weathered hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Son, I think that would be just fine. But remember, this isn't about earning my forgiveness. This is about earning your own self-respect." As Tyler walked away from the Sunrise Assisted Living community, he pulled out his phone and called the VA hospital to inquire about volunteer opportunities. Then he called Connor, Marcus, and Jamie, leaving voicemails that explained his change of heart and encouraged them to make similar choices about their own lives. He didn't know if his friend would follow his example, but he knew that his own path was clear now. He had work to do, not just community service hours to fulfill, but the harder work of transforming himself from the kind of person who hurt others into the kind of person who helped them. The education that had begun with 3 Marines and continued with 1 elderly veteran was far from over. But Tyler Morrison was finally ready to learn what it meant to be a man worthy of the freedom that better men than himself had died to protect. Behind him, in his apartment window, Harold Morrison watched the teenager walk away and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope that the next generation might still learn the values that had once made America great. It was a small beginning, but Harold had learned long ago that great changes often started with small acts of courage and compassion. The broken cane sat in Harold's closet now, but it was no longer a symbol of humiliation and loss. It had become a reminder that even the worst moments could become opportunities for growth, healing, and redemption. Sometimes it took a crisis to reveal who people really were and who they had the potential to become. 6 months later, Tyler Morrison stood in the main hallway of the Veterans Affairs Medical Center, wearing a volunteer badge that had become as much a part of his identity as his own name. The young man who had once taken pleasure in humiliating the vulnerable was now known throughout the facility as someone who could be counted on to show up early, stay late, and treat every patient with the dignity and respect they deserved. The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate. There had been moments of doubt, periods of backsliding, and more than a few occasions when Tyler had questioned whether he was capable of becoming the person he wanted to be. But Harold Morrison had been there throughout the process, serving not just as a mentor, but as a living example of what it meant to find purpose through service to others. Tyler's work at the VA had begun with simple tasks: reading newspapers to patients who had lost their sight, writing letters for those whose hands could no longer hold a pen, and providing company for elderly veterans who had outlived most of their friends and family. But as his understanding deepened and his commitment strengthened, he had taken on more challenging responsibilities. He now spent his afternoons in the psychiatric ward, working with veterans who struggled with PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, and the invisible wounds that came from experiencing combat. Tyler had learned to sit quietly and listen when a Vietnam veteran needed to talk about losing his squad in an ambush, or when a young Marine fresh from Afghanistan described the guilt she felt about surviving when others didn't. These conversations had taught Tyler more about courage, sacrifice, and resilience than any textbook or lecture ever could have. He had met a Navy SEAL who had lost both legs to an IED, but still came to the hospital twice a week to counsel younger veterans. He had worked with an Army nurse who had served 3 tours in Iraq and now dedicated her time to helping homeless veterans find housing and employment. Most importantly, he had learned that heroism wasn't something that happened only on battlefields or in moments of dramatic crisis. Real heroism was the daily choice to keep going when everything seemed hopeless, to help others when you could barely help yourself, to maintain dignity and compassion in the face of suffering and loss. The change in Tyler had not gone unnoticed by others. His parents, initially skeptical of what they saw as a temporary phase brought on by legal trouble, had gradually come to understand that their son was becoming someone fundamentally different from the person he had been. His father, particularly, had been forced to confront his own values when Tyler asked him pointed questions about the ethics of helping wealthy clients avoid consequences for their actions. "Dad," Tyler had said during one memorable dinner conversation, "how is what you do different from what I did to Mr. Morrison? You help people escape responsibility for their actions, and I tried to avoid responsibility for mine." The conversation that followed had been difficult and sometimes heated, but it had ultimately led to changes in how the entire family thought about privilege, responsibility, and their obligations to their community. Tyler's mother had begun volunteering at a literacy program for veterans, and his father had started providing pro bono legal services to veterans dealing with disability claims and housing issues. Tyler's former friends had taken different paths. Connor Walsh had initially tried to laugh off the consequences of the viral video, but when college acceptance letters began arriving with rejections that explicitly referenced his social media presence, he had been forced to confront the reality that actions had lasting repercussions. He eventually enrolled in community college and began working toward a degree in social work, though his relationship with Tyler remained strained. Marcus Johnson had struggled the most with the aftermath of the incident. His pattern of minor criminal behavior had escalated before it finally led to a juvenile detention sentence that served as a wake-up call. With Tyler's encouragement and Harold's mentorship, Marcus had begun to turn his life around, but the process was slow and difficult. He was now working with a veterans organization that helped at-risk youth, trying to prevent other kids from making the same mistakes he had made. Jamie Ortega had perhaps surprised everyone the most. The quiet follower who had seemed incapable of independent thought had found his voice through community service. He had organized a school-wide project to collect and distribute supplies to homeless veterans, and had become an advocate for immigrant families whose children serve in the military. The experience of seeing Tyler's transformation had shown Jamie that change was possible, and he had chosen to become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. But the most profound changes had occurred in the relationship between Tyler and Harold Morrison. What had begun as an obligation imposed by Marines seeking justice had evolved into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Harold had become the grandfather Tyler had never known, while Tyler had become the legacy that Harold had never expected to leave. Their daily walks had become a neighborhood institution. Residents of the Sunrise Assisted Living community would wave from their windows as the elderly veteran and the young volunteer made their way around the building, Harold sharing stories from his military service while Tyler described the veterans he was working with at the hospital. "You know, son," Harold said during one of their walks, "when those boys attacked me that day, I thought it was just another sign that the world was becoming a place I didn't recognize anymore. Young people who had no respect for their elders, no understanding of sacrifice, no sense of duty to anything bigger than themselves." Tyler walked slowly beside him, adjusting his pace to match Harold's careful steps. "What changed your mind?" Harold smiled, using his beautiful new cane to point toward a group of children playing in a nearby park. "You changed my mind, Tyler. You showed me that young people today aren't fundamentally different from young people of any generation. They just need someone to show them what's worth caring about, what's worth fighting for. Those Marines who came to see me," Tyler said, "they could have just beaten me up and called it even. They could have ruined my life and felt justified in doing it. But instead, they gave me a chance to become better than I was." Harold nodded thoughtfully. "That's what good leaders do, son. They don't just punish failure. They create opportunities for growth. They understand that the goal isn't revenge, it's transformation." As they completed their circuit and returned to Harold's building, Tyler noticed a familiar car parked in the visitor's lot. Tony Chun, Lisa Washington, and David Kim were sitting on a bench near the entrance, wearing civilian clothes but maintaining the alert posture that marked them as military personnel. "Mr. Morrison," Tony said, standing as Harold and Tyler approached. "Tyler, we hope you don't mind us dropping by unannounced." "Not at all," Harold replied, genuinely pleased to see the three Marines who had engineered Tyler's transformation. "How have you been?" "We've been keeping track of your progress," Lisa said to Tyler, her tone warm with approval. "The staff at the VA speaks very highly of your work there." David stepped forward, and Tyler noticed that the young Marine was walking without the limp he had displayed 6 months earlier. "Tyler, we want to talk to you about something. The Corps is always looking for young people who understand what service means, people who have proven they can change and grow when challenged." Tyler felt his heart rate increase. "Are you asking me to consider military service?" Tony smiled. "We're asking you to consider it, yes. But not because we need more Marines. We need more leaders. People who understand that strength isn't about dominating others, it's about protecting them. People who've learned that real courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the willingness to do what's right despite being afraid. Harold placed a hand on Tyler's shoulder. The decision is yours, son. But I want you to know that whatever you choose, I'm proud of the man you've become. Tyler looked around at the faces surrounding him. The elderly veteran who had shown him grace when he deserved condemn.